As Italy announces the deaths of 793 more people in the last 24 hours, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte announces the closure of all non-essential businesses. Here in France, the daily death toll from COVID-19 has increased by nearly 20%. The authorities have just announced the first case of a doctor dying from the virus here in France. And stay at home or face arrest. That is the message from the authorities in Jordan, where a nationwide curfew is in place. The kingdom has 99 cases of COVID-19. We'll be live in Amman in just a moment. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Wilson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Once again, there was shock and disbelief around the world on Saturday evening when Italy announced another record increase in the number of deaths from the coronavirus in a single day. The deaths of 793 people were reported in the preceding 24-hour period. That takes the toll in the world's hardest-hit country to almost 5,000. Well, the number of new infections is also up, rising by 14% to 53,578. Well, the northern region of Lombardy, which surrounds the commercial capital Milan, is the worst affected area. Well, the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says this is Italy's most difficult crisis since the war, and he announced that all non-essential businesses must close.
We're slowing down the productive engine of the country, but we won't stop it. The health emergency, as we foresaw, is turning into a full economic emergency. But I want to say to all of you that the state is here. The state is present. The government will take extraordinary measures that will allow us to stand up again and restart as soon as possible.
The Italian Prime Minister speaking there. Meanwhile, healthcare workers in a hospital in the northern Italian city of Bergamo are overwhelmed by the outbreak, and they have words of warning to the rest of the world, saying that other countries must act now if they want to avoid a similar situation. France 24's Erin Ogukeye tells us more.
This hospital in Bergamo is at the heart of Italy's battle against COVID-19. Its doctors and nurses attempting the impossible, attempting to save patients in intensive care or suffering from acute respiratory distress, their lung cells invaded by the virus.
We see every day 50 to 60 patients who come to our emergency department with pneumonia, and most of them are so severe they need very high FiO2 of oxygen.
Nearly 3,000 coronavirus patients in Italy are fighting for their lives, with health workers risking their own for the effort. Exhausted and under extreme pressure, they're increasingly concerned other countries are not learning from their experience.
Maybe at the beginning we didn't know exactly what would be happen, but now we know what happened. It's you don't think that it's happening here and it can't happen everywhere else.
Every day, hundreds of patients take their last breaths, alone, isolated from their loved ones. Coffins amass, but funerals are prohibited. The Italian military deployed to transport the bodies to crematoriums, as the Bergamo cemetery is already full. A bleak new reality in northern Italy, which has now been grappling with coronavirus for a month. Though the first confinement measures were put into place 15 days ago, their effects are yet to be seen.
Well, after Italy, Spain is experiencing the second worst outbreak of the virus here in Europe, and despite a lockdown which has been in place for a week now, the death toll jumped by 394 during the last 24 hours. Well, the Spanish government says it's doing everything it can to combat the pandemic, but it's warning that the worst is yet to come. Here's the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez.
Our country is experiencing the gravest sanitary emergency of the century, a catastrophe that humanity was not prepared for. Just 7 days have gone by, but these 7 days have changed us. They've changed our way of valuing what's important: life, health, affection. They've helped us identify what's less important, and we've seen all the lives of those around us under threat, which ultimately reminds us of life's importance.
And that was the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez speaking there. Well, France has been in lockdown since midday on Tuesday, with excursions from the home limited to buying food, visiting the doctor, walking the dog, or going for a jog. Well, more than 14,000 people have been infected with the virus here in France, and the death toll stands at 562. But that number increased by around 20% during the course of the last 24 hours. Well, the authorities here in France have just announced the first case of a doctor dying from the virus. And the French Health Minister, Olivier Véran, says that he expects the situation will get worse in the days ahead. He's also been outlining the government's next steps, which include an increase in testing and the availability of 250 million more protective masks. France 24's Peter O'Brien has more.
French health workers are running out of masks and patience.
10 masques qui me restent pour bosser. C'est vraiment du bidouillage qu'on fait.
On n'est absolument pas protégé. On a des masques chirurgicaux qui sont des vrais passoires.
Police enforcing quarantine rules are also fed up.
On est en guerre et on envoie les soignants et les flics comme de la chair à canon aujourd'hui. Et ça, c'est inacceptable.
The government has set out to clear up the confusion about the shortage of masks, with Health Minister Olivier Véran saying the situation is improving.
At this stage, the state has 86 million masks. We're predicting that the country will need 24 million masks per week. I can announce that we have made several orders totaling more than 250 million masks, which will be delivered over the next few weeks.
Doctors, nurses and chemists will eventually be provided with 18 masks a week. Home carers 9 per week, and 500,000 a day will be distributed to nursing homes around the country. The government's Scientific Council for the Coronavirus is still mulling over the provision of masks for law enforcement and other professions, and as yet they won't be provided to the general public.
Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the Health Ministry confirmed the first 2 cases of coronavirus this morning, and that sparked fears of a potential outbreak in what is an overcrowded Palestinian territory. Well, the 2 people who tested positive have just returned from a trip to Pakistan. Well, since the militant group Hamas took over in 2007, both Israel and Egypt have imposed severe restrictions on the territory, meaning that Gaza is mostly cut off from the rest of the world. Now to the sound of an air raid siren, a 3-day nationwide curfew began in Jordan on Saturday. The authorities there have ordered all shops to close and for people to stay off the streets until at least Tuesday, when specific times for shopping are going to be announced. Well, the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the kingdom now stands at 99. France 24's Yuka Roya has more.
With the sound of sirens echoing across towns, Jordan went into total lockdown on Saturday morning. A round-the-clock curfew nationwide means people are banned from moving except for emergencies. Non-compliance will not be tolerated.
Anyone who violates the provisions of this order and the measures issued by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defence shall be liable to immediate imprisonment for a period not exceeding 1 year.
Even food stores are shut down. There's not a soul to be seen out on the streets except for patrolling soldiers and sanitary workers. The total ban will run at least until Tuesday, when the government plans to announce specific times for shopping. Although Jordan has far fewer confirmed cases than others in the region, like Iran or Saudi Arabia, the kingdom is taking some of the strictest measures aimed at curbing the spread of the virus. Earlier in the week, it declared a state of emergency and sealed off the capital Amman from the rest of the country. It has also closed land and sea borders with neighbouring countries. All incoming and outgoing flights have been suspended since Tuesday. Just before the curfew went into effect, panicked citizens stormed supermarkets to stock up. And despite the warning, authorities have already arrested hundreds of people accused of violating the stay-at-home order.
Well, let's get more now and speak to Middle East correspondent Gareth Brown, who is currently in Amman. Thank you so much for joining us, Gareth. As we just heard in that report, I mean, it sounds like the authorities there in Jordan are taking this curfew extremely seriously.
absolutely right. It's about 20 days since Jordan recorded its first confirmed case of coronavirus, but this curfew, this lockdown has really come about in the last 5 or 6 days, and it's come like a sledgehammer. I came into the country late on Monday evening. I was one of the last flights allowed to land, and I was immediately put into quarantine in a hotel here in Amman. I think there's around 5,000 other people put in dozens of hotels across the country. We're not even allowed out of our rooms. And just looking out my window, looking into the street, I've covered wars in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. I spent a lot of time in Jordan. I never thought I'd see soldiers patrolling the streets here. So it's come about very quickly, and there's been about 400 people arrested for breaching the curfew since it came into effect. So yeah, really, they're not kind of cutting any corners, the authorities here.
Yeah, it sounds like, as you say, they're taking the enforcement very, very seriously. Just tell us a bit more about the outbreak there of COVID-19 on sort of Jordanian soil. What have you got for us, Gareth?
Yeah, so it stands at 99 confirmed cases. There haven't been any deaths here. Most of those cases have come from people traveling from outside of Jordan. So there were a number of cases, people coming from Europe, others coming from Iraq. I think the real concern here is one, a particularly fragile healthcare system. The hospitals here really aren't they're not cut out to deal with a mass outbreak, on the scale of what we've seen in Iran or in Italy or in Spain. They're not ready for that. And there's a there are quite vulnerable parts of the population here. There's hundreds of thousands of refugees in camps, particularly in the north. There's an elderly population here. Lots of old people live with their families. And I think that is one thing which is really driving a lot of this reaction from authorities, the fact that if there were to be an outbreak here on the scale of, let's say, Italy, Spain, or Iran, the consequences could be really quite devastating.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing us up to speed on the situation there in Jordan. Middle East correspondent Gareth Brown, thank you so much. Well, Iran is one of the hardest hit countries in the world, and in all of the Middle East, it accounts for 8 out of 10 cases of COVID-19. The health ministry in Tehran, meanwhile, says that the coronavirus has killed another 129 people during the course of the last 24 hours. That brings the death toll to 1,685. Well, meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader has refused US assistance in the fight against the virus. He's continuing to cite unfounded conspiracy theories that COVID-19 could be man-made and made by the United States. Well, across the Atlantic, the US has seen more than 280 COVID-19 deaths so far. More than 1/3 of Americans are now having to adjust to life under lockdown. Well, those lockdowns are in place in some of the major cities like New York, Chicago and Los Angeles. Other areas of the US are expected to follow suit during the days ahead. But in Los Angeles, it doesn't seem that everyone is following the rules.
I, like many other people here in LA, are very active, and we like to get our exercise in. That's just the culture around here, Venice, Santa Monica. So I like to come out. I work in the healthcare industry, so I'm working a lot of overtime right now and 12-hour shifts. So just to come out here really helps me refresh my mind.
We're not interacting with anyone else. We're staying away from each other and doing the best that we can to get some exercise, get some sun, and then go back into our isolation.
It's almost impossible for me to not leave my house. I feel like the beach is the perfect place to come to because I don't need to be close to anybody.
Well, another cause for concern there in the United States is the health situation in the country's crowded prisons and the fact that an outbreak could very easily spread in such an environment. Well, in the jails in the New York area, at least 38 people have tested positive for COVID-19. More than 2.2 million people, however, are behind bars right across the United States. That's more than anywhere else in the world. And in other news, a number of people were injured in the Croatian capital this Sunday morning after a powerful earthquake struck there, causing panic and sending hundreds of people outdoors. Well, several buildings, including the city's cathedral, are reported to have been damaged and vehicles have been covered in rubble. Well, the epicenter of that 5.3 magnitude quake was 7 kilometers north of the capital, Zagreb. Well, the city is currently in partial lockdown because of the coronavirus. Well, that brings us up to date with the world news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.